Welcome to First Builders, the podcast for those who shape companies from the ground up. I'm Amber Illig, founder and general partner at the Council Capital, where we invest in early teams solving critical problems in essential industries.
And I'm Tsui, partner at the Council. This show is about the people behind the playbooks, the ones who take a leap early and help define what their companies would become before anyone else could see it.
And today's guest is Haroon Choudery, a founder who's been building at the frontier of AI in healthcare for more than a decade. Haroon's path started with an unusual first role, working for Mark Cuban on an earlier computer vision sports project. He went on to work at Komodo Health with our friend Rachel here, one of the leading healthcare data companies, and also launched a nonprofit to teach students about AI. Now he's the founder and CEO of Autoblocks AI, building a critical testing and evaluation layer for AI systems.
Autoblocks already has really great traction with customers like Hinge Health, and Haroon is shaping a piece of infrastructure that every AI builder will eventually need. Haroon, welcome to First Builders.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, super excited to have you on board here. For listeners listening right now, Haroon is actually one of my former coworkers over at Komodo Health. But yeah, I would love to dive in from the beginning. You know, I remember you had mentioned this before, but you have this unique kind of early experience in working with Mark Cuban on this computer vision sports project. What did you take away from that, and how did it spark your interest in entrepreneurship?
Yeah, great question. Huge blast from the past. So just the short story is, while I was doing my graduate degree at Berkeley, studying machine learning, and this is after becoming super interested in the machine learning space, having spent some time at Facebook around 2015 and seeing how they were using ML to address some massive societal challenges like fake news and sensationalism using machine learning. I became super interested, decided to do my graduate studies, and got connected to Mark through a friend from my undergrad. So he was working for Mark as an associate. And it was really funny. I mean, he looped me into an email thread. Mark had a question, like an ML related question. He looped me into the email thread. And then Mark just responds very bluntly. He says, "What do you think of working for me while you're doing your graduate degree?" And I responded, I'm like, right, sure. Like, that sounds pretty cool. And Mark was really great in just, I guess, like setting the right expectations. He said, this is just a sandbox. Hopefully you'll learn from it. Maybe we'll build something cool. So it was a really low stakes, high potential opportunity. So I took him up on it. And basically the project that I'd worked on with Mark over the course of about 1.5 years, 2 years, was using computer vision to automatically categorize and label different plays that the Dallas Mavericks were running. So they were recording all of their games, and they had this massive repository of video footage, and they had a couple of folks who were manually going in and they were clipping each different play, they were labeling it. And so Mark asked, hey, this computer vision thing is cool. Why don't we try and see if we can automate this? And so that was basically the project that I'd worked on, and was an incredible experience from a personal perspective. I mean, just getting to work with Mark, getting to know the Mavs team, getting to work with them, and also some of the great partners that the Mavs team was working with, Second Spectrum and others. Actually, one partner, I forget exactly the name, but they were acquired by Hinge Health, and we can talk about Hinge Health and the full circle moment and working with Hinge Health through Autoblocks. But it was a great experience, and getting exposure to that, getting hands-on, also just being able to apply what I was learning at Berkeley into a real world setting, and working on something that was super cutting edge. I mean, even to this day, I am not sure if we fully cracked the problem of automatically labeling different plays from video footage of NBA gameplay. It's a massively difficult challenge for a variety of different reasons. We've solved it in other sports domains like football, where the players are relatively small in the compared to the overall frame. But in basketball, you get a lot of challenges like players overlapping over each other. The field is much smaller. The court is much smaller, rather. And so there's huge challenges in doing that. But we actually built something that was quite compelling and saved the annotators a lot of time. So it was eventually deployed and used, which was really exciting.
Yeah, I think a lot of people underestimate how hard data labeling in general is. I saw that even at Cruise with the self-driving cars, just things on the street. Like, there's a lot of sort of hallucinations about what is real, what is not, and then, needing to kind of feed back into the model. So it's fascinating that you were able to do that in sports. So very cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I'd love to, before we get into Autobricks, I'd love to talk about one of your next experiences, which was Komodo Health, which did become one of the most recognized companies in healthcare data. I guess my first question is, how did you even know to join Komodo Health, before it was obvious?
Yeah. Great question. I was just thinking about that earlier before we started recording here, and I found out about Komodo through a classmate that I had worked on some projects with during my time at Berkeley. And she had joined Komodo. I think this was right after Komodo had raised their Series A, and it seemed like an exciting opportunity. And I was always interested in the healthcare space. I don't have a background in healthcare, but it was a really interesting technology problem that was being solved in the healthcare space. And so joined from that angle. And it was an incredible journey. I mean, I got to join the Sentinel team right when the Sentinel team was being put together. That ended up becoming a very successful product line. And for me, I think it was a great opportunity to also just start working in startups and really get the lay of the land of what it was like to work in startups. I always kind of knew that I wanted to start a company someday. That was something that I had always kind of kept in the back of my mind. And my career trajectory it kind of showcases this trajectory from large company to smaller company to smaller company to smaller company to eventually starting a company. And so Komodo was the first time I had worked in a startup, and got to wear a lot of hats on the Sentinel team. Although my official title was data scientist, I was also doing demos. I was taking some of that feedback and incorporating it into the product roadmap and working with the PM on the team to figure out how we can triage and prioritize different customer requests. And so gave me a lot of exposure to those things, which I think is enormously valuable now being a founder. As a founder, you wear a tremendous amount of hats. And so being able to get a little bit of exposure to those different areas and functions was huge. And actually also gave me the benefit of just helping me understand what parts of a business I was most excited by and found to be most interesting. And maybe I had some, skills in that I didn't necessarily get to exercise in previous roles, working purely in a technical capacity. So it was an incredible opportunity. Super excited to see the trajectory that Komodo has been on since I'd left the company, and still in touch with a lot of folks at Komodo, Rachel included, and RF Web. So yeah, it's a pleasure keeping up with the company and seeing how great it's doing.
The network certainly runs really deep.
Yes, absolutely does. Komodo Mafia for sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's been really exciting also seeing some of the AI features that are being rolled out. I was just catching up with somebody on the Komodo team, Ramraj, in SF just a few weeks ago, and just learning about some of the AI initiatives and how Komodo's really taken a big swing, which I think is the right move in the age of LLMs, is really exciting. And so it's great, and there's no shortage of reasons to just keep an eye on what Komodo is doing and be excited by that.
Yeah, and I love how you talked about starting at bigger companies and going to smaller and smaller companies. I feel like that trajectory is really undersung as a really cool way to get into entrepreneurship and see kind of one step at a time. Are you interested in that? And it allows you to take on a bigger scope while sort of seeing around the corner what the company's going to need to look like at the next stage. But I'm also curious on the healthcare side, what did those years teach you about scaling in such a complex, regulated market?
Yeah, I mean, healthcare is such a unique beast, right? I think the degree of robustness and safety and is just so much higher in healthcare. The stakes are just so much higher, and so just being exposed to that environment and seeing what robust actually means in an environment like healthcare has been really valuable. And fast forward to today, at Autoblocks, we actually work with a lot of companies in digital health, as it turns out. And I don't think it's a coincidence. I think part of it is just my network, having spent some time in Komodo, meeting folks in the broader digital health space. But also it's because, the main problem that we work on is reliability for AI applications and products, and making sure that reliability is high. And healthcare is unique in that it has a combination of a couple of things. One of them being a huge appetite for AI. There's obviously a huge potential for LLMs to improve the operating leverage of businesses, especially tech-enabled services in the healthcare space. And the second factor being the need for high reliability. And so because you have that combination of those two things, it's actually a great breeding ground for tools like ours, where we can help you ensure that you have very high reliability. And just by the nature of the high level of appetite for LLM-based applications, the market size there is larger for us as well. So we're seeing a lot of companies that are leaning into AI, which is kind of a prerequisite for using AI, for using Autoblocks.
And curious too, like when you think about, just the, now that you're sitting in this like founder seat, and even when you were at Komodo, like kind of doing demos for customers, now you're probably selling to a lot of customers as well. What's harder, like, from your perspective? Is it like actually proving out the model and proving out all of that to customers, or is it navigating the investor side or like the regulators side as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest difference between doing demos at Komodo and doing demos at Autoblocks is, I would say Komodo, when I had joined, was post PMF, right? I mean, Series A, I think that's kind of a milestone that you can associate with early stages of PMF. Whereas at Autoblocks, I would say we're still pre-PMF. And I know a lot of founders that will say this all the way through Series B. I know some Series C founders who are still saying, we don't have PMF yet. But I truly think PMF is not exactly there just yet. So a big part of doing demos at Autoblocks is we have to do a lot of customer education as well. And LLMs are still relatively new, right? The ChatGPT was launched in November 2022. That's when they became really popularized. And it wasn't like all of a sudden every single company was starting to deploy LLMs to prod. Companies are still relatively early in the adoption cycle for tools like LLMs. And even companies that have experimented with some AI-based features, there's new challenges as they're increasing the complexity of these applications, or leveraging some of the newer agentic workflows, as folks call them. And so a big part of our job in doing demos is actually just being the experts that folks can lean on to help them keep a pulse on what is actually the signal versus the noise, because it is an incredibly noisy space. And so I would say that's a big part of it. Not that it wasn't a part of it at Komodo, but I think the context that was set ahead of a demo at Komodo, demoing Sentinel, was far higher, and the need for customer education was generally lower than what is required at Autoblocks. And so we've really leaned into this, and we do our own podcast where we talk about some of the challenges that other companies are facing and how they've overcome those challenges, and we create a bunch of helpful resources as byproducts of those conversations. And that's been a really helpful enablement tool for our sales cycles. But yeah, I mean, leading a seed stage startup, a big part of our offering is the expertise. A lot of times the decision really comes down to who are the experts that you're going to trust more. And so that, I would say, is like the main difference, is just the level of customer education that's required and the tactics that we're employing in order to facilitate that.
Yeah, it's no small feat. I mean, just AI in general is moving so fast that the average person has trouble keeping up with it. And then healthcare, as you mentioned, is so complex that, the average person also can't keep up with that. So it's a cool place to sit as a founder and help simplify. But for listeners who may not live in kind of the AI infrastructure world every day, can you kind of break down for us what is the problem that Autoblocks is solving?
Yeah, absolutely. So we help companies build highly reliable AI applications. And so if you think about an LLM-based application, if you're putting an LLM into your application for a variety of different reasons, and businesses have a lot of great reasons to deploy LLMs and agents into their workflows, it's almost like inserting a reasoning engine into different parts of your application to enable use cases that may not have been possible before. For example, chatbots, right? Just like this interface where you can just, in free form, communicate with an application and get what you want is relatively novel, right? I mean, we had Ask Jeeves and these toys that used to exist many years ago, but nowadays it's pretty incredible what you can get from just a chat interface. And of course, it's not limited to chat interfaces. There's many other form factors for LLMs and applications, but that's one of the most common ones, if not the most common one that we see. So reliability, of course, is always going to be of utmost importance, especially to companies in regulated industries like healthcare. But reliability is a really, really, really difficult thing to solve for in the world of generative AI. Part of it is because you have free-form inputs a lot of times, the total number of possible inputs into the system is virtually infinite. And so you can't necessarily vet the system to be perfect every single time just by manually reviewing how it's going to perform against different types of inputs. That's a very laborious process. And even if you think you handled all the edge cases, you're bound to, at a certain scale, just encounter more edge cases. And so just being able to get that confidence that you're able to handle all the various user inputs is a challenge. Secondly, the evaluation process is different, and it's challenging in its own right. Oftentimes, the outputs that you get from these systems are very, very subjective, very nuanced, but you need to be able to programmatically handle the quality from those AI outputs in a way that's scalable, right? Programmatically, because it needs to be scalable. And so what we've built is a tool and a platform that effectively helps you ensure reliability by helping you understand all the different ways that your users may use your application and are also using your application today. And then evaluate how exactly your application responds to those different types of inputs, and then to be able to evaluate and attach metrics to those outputs so that you're confident and you have leading metrics to help you understand how good or how bad your AI applications actually are. And it's a moving target. It's not a one and done process. Companies can't just come to us and just figure out all the ways their application might break and just set up those metrics and just solve it and then just be done. It's a moving target because the inputs change all the time, right? User behaviors change, the things that are top of mind for users might change, so the inputs might change. And then your definitions of what is good and what is bad might change as well. And in addition to that, your systems might evolve, right? You might introduce more tools and more functionality into your application. Then all of a sudden that changes the outputs that you're getting. Or you might swap a model out for the latest model. And then that might give you completely different responses on the dozens to hundreds to thousands of different inputs that you're tracking in our platform. So it's a moving target. It's a very dynamic process, but ultimately the job to be done is helping you scale the quality assurance of those AI applications.
Yeah, it seems like it's very different from like kind of how historically you think about like that QA process for, for software as it was prior to AI, right? I know you and I have talked a little bit about this, but it seems like just opposite ends of the spectrum, just given all of the dynamic inputs and outputs that occur. And it's not like a binary, this is right, this is wrong type of input or output as well. So
it's exactly right. Yeah. It's exactly right. It's very different than the traditional product QA process, right? And so the level of subjectivity involved in the process, the level of, I guess, the degrees of freedom in the applications are much higher than what you would traditionally expect in a product as well. And so it's a combination of all those different things that make it a particularly challenging problem, and why it's something that's not necessarily solved for today. And I don't think it's necessarily going to be solved for anytime soon. It's an evolving process, but the most important thing is having a robust system in place that is able to help you assess not just the reliability of your application, just based on the evaluation metrics that you've set up in our platform and the test cases that you've developed to codify the different types of user inputs going into the system, but also at a meta level, the reliability of that system in itself, right? How reliable are those metrics? How reliable are your test cases in capturing the different types of user inputs? So what we like to say is the reliability of your evaluation platform is ultimately the reliability of your AI application. And so we're helping you do both, right? Have a system in place for evaluating the reliability of your application, but also the reliability of the metrics that you've set up in our tool.
And why do you think like companies maybe are not using a company like Autoblocks? Like, are they developing this in-house today? Are they not even like aware that this is something that they need to potentially consider? Because you called, I think, in other podcasts or on posts before, like you called testing and evaluation the missing layer in AI. So yeah, where is that kind of being overlooked today, and why do you think it's being overlooked today?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think any company that's deployed LLMs at some scale understands that this is the main challenge that they need to solve for is having robust evaluations. Because if you solve for that, if you have a great system in place, an effective system in place for evaluating those outputs, then you can just move a lot faster. You can move with a lot more confidence. When you're making changes to the system, you know exactly where to make those changes. You know exactly how much those changes are improving or degrading the performance of your system. The reason why a lot of companies may not have gotten to that stage where this is a felt pain point for them is they might still be AI curious. They might just be, they may not have actually deployed anything yet, and they might just be experimenting with AI tools, or maybe a degree past that where they've deployed something but at a very small scale, a very closed scope, small scope AI project where they're not maybe hitting that level of scale, and they have plenty of guardrails in place that are limiting the creativity and the degrees of freedom in their AI application to a point where they can pretty much manually understand the different areas where their application might break. If a company's like at that stage where they either haven't deployed anything to prod or they've just reduced the scope down significantly and they're really just running like an AI experiment, maybe they can handle this issue and the stakes aren't that high for them. But once you deploy this at a larger scale and you have a significant enough user base, then you absolutely need a system like this in place to help you to make sure things don't go off rails. And there's so many different examples of AI
high
tools.
risk ones, right? Like in healthcare, especially.
Yeah.
Like those are, seems like that's kind of like the ICP, or at least like maybe by chance, like you said, or maybe by design, given your network and such as well, or given the risk aspect of it.
Yeah, exactly. The difference between healthcare and other regulated industries versus, let's say, consumer applications, and we also have consumer applications like Gamma, for example, which use our tooling. The difference really lies in their need for reliability. Like, how reliable do they actually need the application to be? For Gamma to output a presentation, AI generated presentation that is maybe not perfect, the stakes aren't usually that high, right? They can have the user involved in just iterating on the design and the content until it's satisfactory. But in healthcare, if you have a healthcare co-pilot and you don't necessarily trust the outputs from that co-pilot, the stakes can be quite high, right? And so, Hinge Health, for example, with their all the various AI tools that they've deployed, the stakes are quite high if they're is providing exercise plans that are maybe not going to lend to improvements in the PT that their customers are doing and may even potentially harm them, right? And so I think that that's because the stakes are high, that creates a higher need for tools like ours. And so, yeah, I think the big part of it is like the degree of reliability is much, much higher. And as a result of that, there's also this like axis of proactivity versus reactivity, which is really important for businesses that are in regulated industries. You want to be able to proactively identify all the ways that things can go wrong. You don't want to wait for something to go wrong in production, like the Gamma example I just shared. And so it's important to have reliable metrics, but also the coverage part becomes really important. How can you predict all the ways that your application might break ahead of time? So things like red teaming become really important. And so that's a big part of our product focus as well. And there's this whole idea of non-determinism, right? And so non-determinism, these systems are non-deterministic in a sense that you don't necessarily know what it is going to spit out, what the output is going to be for a particular type of user input. I like to think that we're selling determinism as a service. I know that doesn't mean a lot when I just say it, but if I explain it, maybe it'll make a bit more sense. Our thesis is that if you can reliably predict all the ways that your user base might use your application, and you have reliable metrics in place to quantify that, then theoretically you should be able to catch all the ways that your application may go awry. And if you're able to do that, you can address those issues before they become real issues. So our tagline, I think, on our landing page is something like catch issues before your users do. And so that's a big part of it, is the proactivity piece.
I love that, determinism as a service. DAS, let's make it a thing.
Thank you. Yeah, I
Yeah.
hope it becomes a thing. It,
When you
it, it
said it, it
hasn't
made
caught on just
instant
yet,
sense
but
to me. So, especially with what you're doing. But yeah, back to something you mentioned a couple times is Hinge Health. And I know that was one of your early case studies. Would love to hear a little bit more about what that collaboration looked like and what founders can learn from landing a lighthouse customer so early. And fun fact, we recently had Dan Perez on this podcast too. So, fresh off the heels of their IPO. So, it's super cool to hear that you're working with them.
yeah, it's been incredible working with the Hinge team and just seeing all the incredible momentum they've seen in the public markets. And we work with them pre-IPO, and just following along with their journey has been really exciting. And that partnership took place, I believe it was a referral from another customer of ours, Komodo Health, and the Komodo team I think has a strong relationship with the Hinge team, and so we got connected there. And the common denominator between those two teams is they're both virtual clinics which have ambitious AI roadmaps. And as a result of that, because of that, they need to make sure that their applications are reliable. And for obvious reasons, right? It is very obvious why Hinge Health needs to make sure that any AI they deploy is highly reliable. And so they embarked on a rigorous evaluation process to, no pun intended, to evaluate different vendors that are selling evaluation tooling for AI products. Our specialty is specifically in helping companies in highly regulated spaces ensure a high degree of reliability, not just attaching metrics to what they're doing, but also the red teaming stuff that I had mentioned. This idea of like proactively finding issues. And the second part of it is the reliability of evaluation metrics in these subjective domains, like in healthcare, it's a different beast in itself, in that the large language models are not necessarily trained on this type of data, right? Maybe more so nowadays, but they're not necessarily trained to be experts in MSK. And in order to ensure that you have high reliability of those evaluation metrics, the process looks a lot less like developers developing these metrics and seeing if they make sense, and more like subject matter experts on a team providing their, I guess, labels and feedback on outputs and scaling that, right? So, like, actually scaling those experts and aligning the quality and the feedback from our evaluation metrics with those experts. And so we focus very heavily on this alignment process between evaluation metrics and subject matter experts. And the majority of our customers at this point actually have in-house teams of experts, like clinical experts, Pelago and Hinge Health included. So they require a tool that is able to integrate the different workflows, from developers to PMs who are developing these new issues to the subject matter experts who are going to be reviewing the reliability of those evaluation metrics by providing their expertise. And so that's really our forte. And yeah, it's been great. I mean, I believe they started off by piloting us with a single AI feature. Now they have plenty of AI features in production, and we're the backbone of their evaluation process. And so it's been really exciting to see that our tool that our small but mighty team has built has such an impact. Right. And I don't know if Dan had mentioned it in his podcast interview with you, but I know he had mentioned it somewhere that they've seen like an 8-figure return on the AI features that they've deployed.
Wow.
And so a big part of that ROI equation is making sure that those AI features are, well, that's really the thing that gives you confidence in being able to be ambitious with your AI roadmap. And so very fortunate that we've been able to play a small part of that in that story of deploying AI at scale.
That's awesome. And jumping around a little bit, we got really excited to talk about Autoblocks. We wanted to ask more about that. But I also want to highlight something a little different that you did even before joining Komodo. You started a nonprofit to teach students about AI. So what kind of pulled you toward education, and what did you learn from working with the next generation of builders?
Yeah. So education is something I'm super passionate about. It's something that, fortunately for me, it still plays a big role in our go-to-market motion today, for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, customer education being so important in our sales process. So AI for Anyone was a nonprofit I started in 2015, also at the same time as, actually 2017, sorry, around the same time that I started working with Mark and was doing my graduate studies at Berkeley. And the motivation for that was really to bridge the knowledge gap between underserved communities and more privileged communities when it came to their understanding of AI. And this was something I felt really passionate about. So a little bit about my background. Immigrated from Pakistan to the US when I was about 5 years old. And my dad was a cab driver in New York. Many of my cousins, my uncles were cab drivers. And around 2010 was when the taxi medallion bubble popped. And as a result of that, a lot of my family members lost decades of savings. And so that was the first time that I had exposure to how sudden technological shifts can really adversely impact folks who are blindsided. I'm very pro technology, pro acceleration, and all of that. But I do think folks should not be blindsided. And education is a big part of that. And so I think about how maybe if my family members were more attuned to the tech progress that was being made in things like ride sharing apps, maybe they would have been able to make better decisions on how to deal with those investments. And then having become the first person in my family to graduate high school and then go to college and end up at Facebook, where ML was being used at such a massive scale for such a massive societal problem as well, right? Like fake news became the problem. It was like a headline story in 2015, and I was right in the heart of it. And so I got exposure to ML, and I saw a huge freight train just heading towards us. And I was thinking a lot about my family members and the folks who might be impacted negatively by the automation that it was going to lend to. So AI for Anyone was really I'll say like a passion project to start that was focused on that problem, and it blew up in a way that I didn't really anticipate. Around the time that COVID had hit, we did our first virtual webinar after teaching, I think, about 5,000 students between New York City and Allentown, Pennsylvania. And that virtual webinar ended up getting, I think, 55,000 registrants.
Wow.
At the time, it was Eventbrite's most registered event of all time. And it got coverage on CNBC, Fortune magazine, a bunch of different publications. We had gotten not investments, but we had gotten donations from folks like Grimes and Lenny Rachitsky and other folks that I was a fan of. And so it really ended up becoming a bigger thing than I had anticipated. It was always something I was working on outside of school and work. Never committed to it full time, but it was something I was really passionate about. I'm still passionate about to this day. AI literacy is I think imperative, and we're actually rolling out Auto Skills, which is a arm of Autoblocks that's specifically focused on AI literacy for organizations. So we're rolling out that out this week because I think it's an incredibly important challenge. And if I wear my business hat, I also think it's valuable. I mean, folks are still early stages in their AI adoption journey when we're thinking about the grand scheme of things. And so if we can earn their trust early on and help them understand all the different ways that AI can apply to their different workflows and help them increase that operating leverage, then we can hopefully create a larger market for us to sell our reliability tooling into.
Wow, that's awesome. And I totally resonate with what you said. You know, it's interesting when these big tech waves happen. As you mentioned, like it becomes a deterrent for folks that were not set up for it, but then it's also an accelerant for the people that were. So it's really neat that you're helping to close that gap because it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it seems like this is kind of the third big wave that you're seeing, from the taxi medallion bubble burst to the ML fake news thing, and now this huge wave of AI coming in. So I love that you're kind of rolling that into what you're building at Autoblocks too.
Well, thank you very much. And what I would say is the magnitude of what we're seeing right now, it just completely trumps everything we've seen in the past, right? And I would be lying, and anybody would be lying if they if they said that they saw this happening from a mile away. I think pre-2021, 2020, even folks who were in the ML space, I don't think they would have anticipated the rate of progress that we're seeing right now. I mean, the fact that we're having some of the conversations that we're having right now, Mustafa at Microsoft, I think, just published an article about the seemingly artificial intelligence, or what was it, seemingly AGI, or something along those lines, about the societal impact that might have on people's psychology, being too attached to these models that we're creating. And these are conversations that were almost considered sensationalist and sci-fi like 5 years ago. And now it just makes a ton of sense to be having these conversations. And so this wave that we're seeing right now would never have anticipated how big it was going to be. And so it's enormously exciting for me to just be playing in the arena at this time, but also at the same time, it's just nerve-wracking, right? Things are moving really quickly, and
Totally.
I hope that we can get a good grip on things so that we can steer things in the right direction. And that's really at the ethos of why I'm so passionate about the education piece is I do think education is the key to making sure that we can navigate this uncertainty in the best way. And you can apply that analogy to Autoblocks as well, right? I mean, uncertainty is not something that you want when you're navigating things that are high stakes. And so having data and having an understanding of things, i.e. education, it's invaluable.
Yeah, no, definitely. It sounds like, yeah, like education seems to be a pretty big common thread kind of across your career. Curious about like any other like common threads that you're thinking about, because when I hear about kind of like, take a step back and look at like your background, like working with Mark Cuban, when you were back in school, and then at Komodo, your nonprofit, Autoblocks today, there's very different settings, very different aspects, of course, like with things like AI and education through it. Any other common threads that you think about that you've really carried kind of through those experiences?
Yeah, I would say the biggest common thread there is I've always optimized for roles that would let me wear a lot of hats. As much as I love machine learning, I was always reluctant to take on roles which would limit my ability to learn about other parts of a business. Because as I mentioned, I always knew that I wanted to start a company someday. And starting a company is just such a multifaceted endeavor. And I didn't know the first thing about go-to-market when I joined Komodo. And so just being able to get plugged into doing demos and doing interviews and understanding the product process. And then from there, I actually learned that I liked the go-to-market side of things more than I did the technical side of things. And I then pivoted my career to leading growth teams at a couple of startups working on technical products. So I've always optimized for roles where I could wear a lot of hats. I just think it's valuable as a founder. And this idea of this like generalist archetype being powerful and like a powerful archetype to step into has proved to be true in ways I didn't anticipate. I think nowadays, if we're looking at the areas that AI is really augmenting or automating in a lot of ways, a lot of it is technical work, right? Data analysis is maybe a little away, although we're making some great strides on automated data analysis tools like Julius, et cetera. But software engineering, for example, we see how much more leverage we're able to get in software development as a result of AI. And so it's been validating in that sense. Being an ideas person, and I interviewed Amjad Masad at Replit as part of like the initial interviews that I was doing to validate different problems. I interviewed Amjad and May Habib at writer.com in the fall of 2022. And Amjad had this idea of the ideas guy having more power than ever in an organization. People would say the ideas guy in a derogatory way in the past, but nowadays the ideas guy is actually in a really great position, because if you're getting a ton of leverage on the technical side of things and you're able to vibe code an application, and we've seen plenty of vibe coded applications that are actually generating meaningful revenue, then the alpha really comes from being able to see opportunities and being able to execute on them quickly. That is a lot. I guess somebody can be a lot more effective at doing that if they have an understanding of how to actually build a business around a particular idea. And so, yeah, I think it's panned out well, and it reflects in the organization that we've built today as well. We serve some very large, credible customers. We've built a very robust platform. We're HIPAA compliant, SOC 2 Type 2. We have been for over a year and a half now, but we're still single digits in the team. And I think about every hiring decision extremely critically, because every month that goes by, and sometimes it feels like every day that goes by, depending on if it's like OpenAI dev day is coming up, the amount of leverage that each employee has is so much higher. And we're always exploring ways that we can increase our operating leverage. We lean heavily into using AI tools to augment the work that we're doing. And so it's been really exciting from that lens, just seeing what you can do as a small but mighty team.
That's awesome. And we'll transition a little bit into rapid fire playbook questions. So just feel free to say the first thing that comes to mind. What do you think is the most underrated skill for a founder in AI?
Scrappiness. I think scrappiness would have to be the number one thing. And I'm actually doing this series right now. It's called AI Ready, where I'm interviewing teams that have actually effectively led AI transformations at their companies. And so we're releasing episodes with founders at Intercom, Zapier, and Runway this week. And that's the number one thing that I think comes up in these conversations. And it makes a ton of sense. It's also the same thing I would have said even pre those conversations, is the most important thing is that you're actually leaning into this tech wave and you're trying these tools out. There's no better way to learn than by getting into Zapier, getting into Lindy, getting into, if you like code, tools like LangChain, to build stuff yourself. You're going to learn so much more doing that rather than reading blog posts or even watching YouTube videos. And so scrappiness is really, really, really important. And I think leadership needs to lean into these tools if they want to enable AI effectively across an organization. And so I would say any company that you see that is doing a great job of leaning into this AI wave, I would bet that their leadership is very hands-on with understanding what these AI tools are capable of and leveraging those tools for their own personal education rather than from an ivory tower perspective and saying, hey, look, we need to become AI enabled without any visceral understanding of what these tools are capable of.
Yeah, totally agree. What about a book or a concept that stayed with you?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, that's one of the things I was thinking about recently is I haven't read as many books as I would have liked. But if there's a book that So I don't know what the book is called. I think it's something like Traction, and the book Traction talks about this like entrepreneur operating system and thinking about your business as it's a very simple concept in the end, but it's thinking about your organization as a sum of different systems and outlining all of the different roles that contribute to that system. That has actually been a really effective, not just from the perspective of creating very effective EOS meetings, as they call them in that book, but this exercise of operationalizing your business as a sum of different systems is actually really valuable for a AI native team because you're able to identify all of the different areas and all of the different functions in your business and think critically in a more scoped way about where you can add leverage using AI tools. And so that's something we've actually instituted as a ritual for the team is every week, sometimes every couple of weeks, we'll think about different functions and where we're spending our time and how we can potentially leverage AI tools to increase our leverage there. And it's proved very fruitful. And we've seen there's very few functions where we cannot leverage AI tools. Part of it is a lot of the vendors that we work with, even for things like security and compliance, right? We work with Vanta. A lot of those tools are incorporating AI into their tools. And so it's very worthwhile understanding how to use things like Vanta AI Copilot so that instead of spending a ton of time or like having somebody spend a ton of time going through those security checks manually, how they can leverage those tools to just move faster. And so I think that's been a really helpful book, but really any book that is about thinking about businesses in a more, from a systems perspective, I think is valuable, especially in this age, because you're able to apply those AI workflows a lot more in a much more pointed way with that framework.
Yep. And then what's one piece of startup advice that you think is total BS?
Yeah.
There's a lot of advice out there for founders.
There's a lot of advice. I think the one advice that I have really taken to heart and is to take all advice with a grain of salt and to really think about the context in which that advice was shared. But if there's a single piece of advice that I would say maybe doesn't apply to the setting that we operate in, it's move fast and break things. Going back to my days at Facebook, I remember posters everywhere. I'm pretty sure they used to give us posters. I had one hanging up in my apartment at the time. There's obviously, it's a nuanced principle and has to be taken with a grain of salt. But I think especially if you're building AI in a high stakes setting, it's easier than ever to go from 0 to 80%, and it's harder than ever to go from 80 to 100%. And what a lot of companies will do is they'll prioritize speed over everything. And what they'll be stuck with is an AI application that makes for a really cool demo, but is not something they can actually productionize. And the magic in these AI tools is really in that last 20%, being able to handle all those different edge cases. And that is not a fast process, so to speak. And a lot of the work that goes into that may seem mundane, but it's very, very important. And so I think moving fast and breaking things just does not apply to building AI tools in highly regulated industries with high stakes like healthcare.
Yeah, totally agreed. And then finally, what's the best way for people to connect with you or with Autoblocks? And is there anything that you'd like to shamelessly plug?
Yeah, well, I'm on Twitter, just my full name, Haroon Choudery. It's not the easiest to spell, but I'm sure you can catch the
Put
spelling
it in the
from
show notes
wherever
and the title.
it's in the show
Yeah.
notes. Perfect.
find
And LinkedIn, so Twitter and LinkedIn are really where I spend most of my time on socials. And in terms of what I might want to plug, appreciate the opportunity. So definitely check out autoblocks.ai if you're interested in building highly reliable AI applications. We can help you out with tooling, with education as well. I mean, we're happy to even just answer questions, if anything, and guide you in the right direction. But the biggest thing I'd like to plug is actually AutoSkills. So we're rolling out AutoSkills this week, autoskills.ai. And if you're a team that's AI curious and you want to get to AI ready, hit us up. We're going to be doing a ton of workshops virtually, also company-specific workshops. So if you want to enable your team, if you want to get everyone experimenting in a span of 24 to 48 hours, we're going to be running company-specific workshops through that, specifically to get folks hands-on, help them understand the ins and outs of the tools that are available at their disposal. And this format of these sprints or hackathons is by far the most effective way of getting a team from AI curious to AI ready. And this is something that is proving to be true just based on my conversations on the AI Ready show as well. It's the most common tactic that leaders have deployed aside from issuing a code red in their organizations. So of course, just making it a huge deal to shaking up an organization and making it clear that AI is a imperative. In addition to that, providing a well-structured format for getting folks hands-on is critical. And so we can help you out with that.
That's awesome. Sounds like a great opportunity for anybody listening. I already wrote down somebody I think could really benefit from that.
Love it.
Well, anyways, thank you, Haroon. This has been an awesome conversation. Really appreciate you joining us, and we're excited to share this with everyone.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thanks again. Yeah, that was such a great conversation. Amber, what stood out to you the most?
Yeah, a couple things. I mean, the first thing that just stood out to me that I resonated with a lot was his move from very large companies to very small companies, because I kind of did the same, going from Fortune 500 at Eli Lilly and Apple all the way down to seed stage at Atmos, and in the middle going through an IPO at Snap, and then being at Cruise. So it was just interesting to hear, like, similarly, both of us thought early on in our career, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur, but I'm kind of not ready yet. I want to get these different skills along the way. And kind of, it seems like he designed his career as sort of a portfolio of those type of experiences that have really rounded him out as an entrepreneur now. So that was cool to hear.
Yeah, he even talked about how he intentionally took roles that allowed him to build like kind of a more rounded out generalist skill set, like not just a data scientist at Komodo Health, but a data scientist that also gave him exposure to doing customer demos and learning more go-to-market skills. So I really love that he, like you said, intentionally took that. And then the other thing that stood out to me also was the fact that he always wants to think about like bringing people up to speed on AI and what's coming. And, that's in part because of his background and what he saw, like, with his family, but just even thinking about like the education piece of it, and how now, because he's thinking about education and educating his customers as a distribution for his company at Autoblocks. And so it's really cool to see how his personal passion around education becomes his distribution edge.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah. And then the other thing I really liked is that he is really sitting and implanting himself at the intersection of tech and AI and healthcare.
Totally.
And not that he's staying only focused on healthcare now, but he's clearly had a long career in healthcare, and that's been a really interesting ICP for him, being a highly regulated industry. But what we see so many times as a VC pitching LPs and then a VC investing in founders is so many times I see folks that just want to wear one hat or the other. They're like, I'm only investing in AI or I'm only investing in healthcare. But the two things are no longer, separate. And as you know, at the council, we think that healthcare is going to be one of the biggest areas that is impacted by AI in a positive way. And so I think, he's doing a good job of really being a part of that, both ecosystems in a big way. So he cited, working with Gamma and Zapier and Replit even he's had on his podcast. So, he's very much not going to get isolated in one world or the other. He's still working with customers like Hinge Health and many digital health companies as well. But we really think both of those perspectives are important at the council. So it was cool to hear that from him.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to link everything that Haroon mentioned in his show notes. And if you want more First Builders stories like this, make sure to tune in for our next guest.
Yeah, and make sure to subscribe to First Builders wherever you get your podcasts and sign up for our newsletter for behind the scenes insights and early drops from our guests.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. We're going to see you next time on First Builders.